Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. It's Sunday evening here in the UK, and as is becoming a semi-regular feature on the channel now, we're coming back on Sunday doing a morning after the night before video, a bit more extended, a bit more rambly. Before beginning this video, I will say initial instant reaction to Kell Brook, Sergey Rebchenko, and to Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz already up on the channel. If you want to hear specific details on those two fights, please check out those videos. In this video, I'm going to do my best not to make it too long. You know, I was beginning to write a few notes for this video and realised that there's so much to talk about at the minute that I could probably end up rambling on for an hour or so. So I'm going to try and keep it shorter than that. Aim is going to be 20 to 30 minutes, but we'll see where it takes us. In this video, few more thoughts on Wilder, a few more thoughts on Kell Brook, although we'll try and keep those segments a bit shorter given we've already covered them at length on the channel. We're going to be talking Dmitry Bivol and Sergey Kovalev, both who fought last night, and we'll probably also offer a few other thoughts on some of the undercard fights from last night. Dirrell versus Uzcatsguy, and also the UK undercard, where there were one or two fights that caught my eye. So without further ado, I guess let's start with Deontay Wilder, really. Video went up on Wilder. It was a performance where I think it's kind of split the boxing public. I've seen a lot of people who are impressed, a lot of people who are very unimpressed. For me, I would say I'm closer to impressed than unimpressed. Put simply, I like to see fights where fighters are tested, where fighters have to answer questions, and Deontay Wilder sure answered questions last night. You know, he had to come from well behind, he had to weather storms, and he had to do it against by far the most formidable opponent he'd fought in his career to date. It's no surprise to me that Deontay Wilder still has some technical flaws. I think that's obvious and has been obvious in this game for all to see for quite some time. So the fact that those flaws were once again on display last night didn't really surprise me. But I was very taken with how Deontay Wilder weathered the storm. I know he looked in all sorts of bother in round 7, but credit goes to Deontay Wilder for finding his second wind, for finding the determination hanging in there, and for finding the punch, having been through that trouble to end the fight. I give him a huge amount of credit for that. The biggest question that he's answered for my money is his chin. You know, there's always been talk about Deontay Wilder having a glass jaw. He proved last night his jaw is anything but glass. We've seen Luis Ortiz floor and destroy fighters like Tony Thompson, like Bryant Jennings, those sort of names. Bryant Jennings, known for having a very good chin. Deontay Wilder wasn't dropped. Deontay Wilder was hurt, was rocked, but for me, I've always said it since I started this channel, the sign of a good chin is somebody who can get hurt, maybe even go down, and continue to win the fight. And that's what Deontay Wilder did last night. So credit goes to him for that. A lot of people talking about Wilder AJ off the back of it. Let me put it this way. AJ is a superior technical boxer to Deontay Wilder. I don't think there's too much dispute over that. And I do think AJ makes less pure boxing mistakes than Deontay Wilder does. That's my honest take. And Deontay Wilder needs to be very, very careful going up against a guy like Anthony Joshua. I also feel that Deontay Wilder got away with one or two things last night based on the fact that Ortiz was smaller and based on the fact that Ortiz was slower. In my post-fight video, I talked about the fact how Deontay Wilder kind of relied on reactions in terms of his defence. His hands were down low, his chin was up in the air, and he kind of relied on seeing Ortiz's punches and, you know, moving his head and trying to react to them in that way. I think against a guy like Anthony Joshua, he'd have to be careful doing that, because I think Joshua's a lot faster than Ortiz, a lot more athletic than Ortiz, and he's a hell of a lot bigger than Ortiz. So, you know, whilst Ortiz would only be threatening at a certain distance, I think Joshua would have the scope to be a threat from longer range than Ortiz was. Having said all of that, if we think of Anthony Joshua, whilst he is a very tall, rangy guy, he doesn't always box like a long-range fighter. You know, he doesn't box like Tyson Fury boxes or boxed against Vladimir Klitschko, for example. When Anthony Joshua is at his most devastating, he's kind of in that three-quarter range where he can kind of set his feet and unload his gun. You know, he's not someone who's at his most devastating when he's dancing around the ring, throwing punches while moving. He's not someone who... He's got a decent jab, but he doesn't fight fights purely based on the jab, for me. Joshua doesn't. So, yeah, I think Wilder would have to be careful going in against Joshua defensively. But funnily enough, I don't think Joshua would actually be... It's weird, because whilst Joshua is bigger than Ortiz, I think Joshua's approach against Deontay Wilder may be more a case of closing down the range on Wilder than we saw last night or saw in previous Ortiz fights. I actually think, and I saw a video that Ultratech Sports did today where he kind of speculated that from a style perspective, Joshua could actually be an easier fight than Ortiz. I believe that Joshua is better than Ortiz, but I do think there's some suggestion that actually, style-wise, AJ has the potential to be a bit more plodding, especially if he keeps coming in so heavy and Wilder's so much lighter. And I think there is a risk for AJ that he will get caught coming in, because whilst he's a big guy, I think he would really like to close down the gap on Deontay Wilder, and I think that's when Deontay Wilder's potentially at his most deadly, when he can get that work off from long range. I view it as a tough fight. I've always viewed it as a tough fight. Historically, I've kind of always leaned to Joshua, just on the basis that Wilder, for me, makes too many defensive mistakes, and I kind of always thought a guy like Joshua, who's athletic, who's got good timing, who's an underrated counter-puncher, who's got less defensive frailties. I guess I've kind of always thought Joshua would be the sensible pick on a sort of 60-40 basis. You know, right now I'm not so sure. You know, Wilder answered a lot of questions last night. Joshua's last performance against Takam was possibly his most questionable to date, and you know, Wilder's will to win, his determination and his power are just so significant that if Wilder is able to catch Joshua with some of the punches he caught Ortiz with last night, I think there could be a similar result. I'm really on the fence on this fight. I now see it as a pure 50-50, and of course if it gets made, it's one I'll have to make a decision on. But right now I do find it a tough fight to call. It wouldn't surprise me if the fight... it wouldn't surprise me if either guy won, because I think Wilder has the power to wipe Anthony Joshua out with one shot, and I do think Wilder's defensive frailties at some point will be to his detriment. I've always said that I've been sceptical of that fight happening, and that remains my view. If I was Eddie Hearn, he has two mega blockbuster paydays, which are Fury and Wilder. I think they'd be more inclined to take the Fury fight. I actually think that's a bigger fight in the UK, which is their core market. And I think Fury, given his problems outside of the ring, given his inactivity and given his weight gain, is perceived to be the easier and less threatening opponent, particularly when you factor in that he apparently has a lot less power than Deontay Wilder. So I suspect Fury, in their minds, is greater reward and slightly lower risk. So I've always thought that is the angle that they will probably go down rather than Wilder. And given the fact that Wilder's 32, maybe they'll be inclined to wait till summer 2020 to have the Wilder fight, when, you know, there's just a few more miles on the clock. Maybe some of that speed has started to dissipate. Maybe some of those reactions have started to dissipate. And I think they'll be more inclined to look at Fury summer 2019, Wilder summer 2020. I hope Wilder fight does happen, but I'm sceptical. I think the commercials are going to be very hard to negotiate there. I don't think Hearn is going to give Wilder what Wilder's expecting, and I honestly, I've always been of the mind that that fight is less likely to happen. I think they view Wilder as a very legitimate threat, and I think rightly or wrongly they perceive Fury to be easier meat. And as I say, my belief is that's actually a bigger fight in the UK, fighting Fury and fighting Wilder. I still believe Wilder is not globally as big a name as he could be. But that's just my take. But all in all, I'm going to say I was pleased with Wilder's performance last night. I think he's a guy who's quite easy to pick holes at. He's a guy who's quite easy to take the mick out of because some of his frailties. But we already knew those frailties existed. And what he did last night was win a fight despite those frailties and answer a lot of questions against a very good opponent. So I give Deontay Wilder a lot of credit. I'll touch just briefly on the undercard, specifically the Andre Dirrell fight. I was sad to see this fight. A sad end for me to Andre Dirrell's career. When Andre Dirrell fought Carl Frost, I honestly was of the mind that Andre Dirrell was one of the most naturally talented fighters I'd ever seen. I actually do believe that by the narrowest of margins, Carl Frost did deserve to win the fight by the way he came on so strong and so late. But I thought the class shown by Dirrell in the ring, the movement, the evasiveness, the speed, the jab, the sniper long-range work, I thought it was breathtaking. And I honestly thought that he would bounce back from that loss to Carl Frost and become a top-level fighter. I thought he'd be a world champion. I thought he could potentially go on to be a pound-for-pound top-level fighter. I thought he was that good. Now, he's had all sorts of problems in his career to date. There's been the Arthur Abraham situation, the Jose Uzcategui 1 situation, various health issues, various inactivities. And last night, at 34 years of age, it looked like Andre Dirrell had been beaten by Father Time. Uzcategui, credit to him for getting the win. Very, very unorthodox. He kind of got low, very low, almost in like a sort of peekaboo type style. He kind of got very low, crouched down, and then would pop up and try and explode and try and build pressure. Very, very, very unorthodox guy. Was catching Dirrell, seemed to be controlling the pace of the fight. And whilst Dirrell was certainly landing the smarter long-range boxing work, he looked uncomfortable for large swathes of the fight. And Uzcategui looked confident and looked like he was, as I say, controlling the pace. Dirrell, I don't know the exact reason for the stoppage, but Dirrell seemingly, either he or his corner pulled the plug at the end of the 8th round. Funnily enough, at the time, I still had Dirrell in the fight on the cards. I think Uzcategui had the momentum in the fight and was by far the most likely winner. Don't get me wrong. But I didn't think Dirrell was out of the fight at the time of the stoppage. And that's why it was, so disappointing to sort of see his career end like that. And, I do think this will be a loss that will be near impossible to come back from. Sadly, the way Dirrell fights or did fight at his peak with so much speed, so much reaction, so much movement, perhaps that is not the style that's going to age well and make a boxer successful into his mid to late 30s. But what I will say is when I will reflect on Andre Dirrell's career, when all is said and done, it'll be one of disappointment. He's a nearly man. He's an underachiever. Dirrell is a guy who should have won multiple world titles. He should have had the world at his feet. He should be one of the biggest names in boxing, because of the talent he had. But unfortunately, he's met some bad times in his career. He's had some bad luck in his career. And, maybe he as an individual was slightly lacking in the mental fortitude you need in this game, which was again on display last night. But, nevertheless, Dirrell is an unfortunate end to an unfortunate career that at one stage promised a lot. And I was very, very sad to see his career come to a close in that way that it did, unfortunately. Let's touch briefly on Kell Brook. Post-fight video on Kell Brook went up last night. A lot of people asking me about Kell Brook versus the guys at 154. Let me say, Kell Brook looks like an elite talent he always had, but his resume is still far from as strong as his brand would suggest. He's best known for his losses these days against Golovkin and Spence, but if you actually said who are Kell Brook's 3 best wins, it's surprisingly light. Brook has a very notable win against Sean Porter. That was a fantastic win, albeit in a competitive fight, and Brook deserves a hell of a lot of credit from that win. But if we take that win out, because that's a singular piece of form, it's kind of hard to see how strong Kell Brook's resume is other than that fight. Sean Porter's a very good fighter. He's a world level fighter, but he is one of these guys who tends to come up just a whisker short at the top level. And for me, I'd go as far as to say Kell Brook does not have an elite name on his resume. He doesn't have. I mean, look at the guys who've been in the division when Kell Brook was active: Mayweather, Pacquiao, Marquez, Khan, Thurman, Garcia. He doesn't have any one of them names on his resume. And the 2 times he's faced elite level, admittedly both times with substantial mitigating circumstances, he's lost by stoppage. So when people are asking me how he'd do against the best at 154, for me it's still an unknown, because I don't think we've ever seen Kell Brook win a fight against truly elite opposition. But what I will say is Kell Brook at his best looks like a fighter who is of the elite standard. He maybe hasn't proved it against elite level fighters, but the visual impression he gives is that he is an elite level fighter. And as I said, when I re-watched the Kell Brook-Errol Spence fight, I believe Kell Brook still has a hell of a lot to offer. And last night confirmed that for me. Could I confidently say he will beat the champions at 154? No. I believe he's going into those fights with a substantial size disadvantage, and I think those are going to be very, very tough fights for him. I noticed Eddie Hearn in an interview with IFL TV today talking about a potential rematch with Errol Spence at 154. Would not be the direction I'd be taking him in. Heard talk about the Charlo fight. Again, probably wouldn't be the direction I'd be looking to move him in. Kell's had those 2 very, very tough fights back to back. Great news that he's got a win against Rabchenko last night. But I'd still be looking at an in-between fight. Obviously the Amir Khan fight is a very, very attractive fight if it can be made, and Brook would be a big favourite in that fight these days. But maybe I'd be looking more at the likes of Liam Smith, Saddam Ali, that sort of bracket, rather than the Charlos and the Spences. I'd be looking to rebuild Kell Brook steadily, rather than just letting him knock out Rabchenko and then throwing him to the wolves yet again. I guess what I'm saying is, whilst I believe Kell Brook is still Kell Brook and still has a lot to offer to the game, Brook throughout his entire career has kind of not really had the right fights at the right time. And I think now is the time to rebuild him, to step him up, notably but gradually, and not rush him straight away into an Errol Spence fight and risk ending his career again at a time when he's just rebuilding. Let me touch on some of the undercard action from the Kell Brook card. I enjoyed the Gavin McDonnell-Callier fight. Did enjoy it. I thought Gavin McDonnell was a very, very deserved winner, and he put in a career best performance. I thought he boxed very nicely and fought an excellent strategic game plan, really taking over in the second half of the fight. Gamaliel Fai was poor. He showed a lot of heart to stay in the fight. I thought he was going to get stopped in round 10, so he showed a lot of heart, but he was poor. Lots of swinging and missing, a huge amount of inaccuracy, his chin up in the air begging to be countered. Imagine if he'd been in with a puncher in round 10, the guy would have been knocked spark out. A lot left to learn for Gamaliel Fai. Real technical adjustments that need to be made there. Needs to stop loading up. Needs to stop leaving himself open, and he was out hustled by a bigger, more experienced and fitter opponent. The gas tank really emptied in the second half of that fight on your fight, and McDonnell, we know he's a fitness freak. He got on it and he pressed home the advantage. I want to give a bit of a shout out to Dave Caldwell. I thought he gave good advice in the corner, really good advice. I thought he was the architect of a good game plan. I thought the advice he was giving Gavin McDonnell with regard to the use of the jab and the construction of his punches was really, really spot on. Once I heard him in the corner telling McDonnell that when he tries to time the right hand, he's looping it a bit too much over the top and he needs to bring it a bit straighter and a bit smoother. We saw McDonnell adjust. We saw the results instantly. We told him to ask McDonnell to commit to the jab. There were large swathes of the fight where McDonnell wasn't using it too much. McDonnell comes out, starts to jab a bit more, starts to double it up. The results are immediate and obvious. Really, really good corner work from Dave Caldwell. And I thought the corner work on the other side from Max McCracken on the Yafai side was questionable. I listened closely to the corner work in rounds 10 and at the end of rounds 10 and 11 that Yafai was receiving, and he was being told to get on it, you know, show a bit more. For me, a fighter in the heat of battle needs to be told something a bit more than to get on it. You know, he needs to be told, put your chin down. You know, stop swinging from outside the pocket against a guy twice your size. I thought, whilst he was trying to hype up his man, the advice that Gamaliel Yafai didn't need at that point, having taken a bit of a beating, was to get on it. I thought there were levels both inside the ring and in the corner, and I think it's a good win for McDonnell and for Dave Colwell. Off the back of that, they put themselves in a position to get another big fight, and I think he'll have won a lot of fans last night, so credit to him. Dave Allen versus Lenroy Thomas. As you guys know by now, technical decision, technical draw, first round draw, after an accidental clash of heads opened up a horrific cut on David Allen, you know, the referee stepped in and had to call the fight off. My take is that this fight will probably happen for a third time. David Allen's going to need to sit out for a good while now because of that cut, and you wonder if Lenroy Thomas will get a big offer between now and then from the likes of a Joe Joyce or a Daniel Dubois, perhaps a financially lucrative offer too good for him to turn down. So maybe that third fight won't happen, but my gut instinct tells me that third fight should happen. I'm not saying it was a classic first time round. It was obviously very disappointing second time round, but you kind of feel there needs to be closure to that Lenroy Thomas Dave Allen series. And the rumblings from Eddie Hearn and from Lenroy Thomas are that fight can be made. One thing I will say, the fight only lasted 2 minutes. It's hard to give any profound analysis based on only 2 minutes worth of boxing. And I do want to caveat this by saying that fighters are more than within their rights just to do nothing for 2 rounds and have a look at their opponent and try and ease their way into the contest. So I don't want to write off any man based on only 2 minutes of action, because you know, a fighter could easily have the game plan to give up the first 2 or 3 rounds and then come on in the middle rounds. But based on only 2 minutes of boxing, I wasn't impressed with what I saw from David Allen. For me, the key to Allen becoming more successful in this contest was technical adjustments. It was judgment of range. It was not smothering his own work. It was the construction and utilisation of his jab. Early on, based on 2 minutes of action, as I say, he was already getting out-jabbed. He was already getting timed by Lenroy. Few times he ate clean punches from Lenroy early on in the fight. Only 2 minutes worth of action, but Lenroy Thomas, to me, in that 2 minutes, looked by far the superior technician and looked like he was going to take the first round in very, very convincing style. You know, disappointing from both guys. They'd both whipped themselves up into very, very good shape from this. Heart goes out to both of them. It was pretty devastating to watch for either guy. You know, but for me, when I heard Allen in the tune-up to this fight, I heard him talking about, you know, how determined he was, how experienced, the experience that he'd gained, you know, how much better shape he was in. I didn't hear him referring to any technical adjustments he'd made, and the fact that he seems to have more of an on-off relationship with a trainer rather than a permanent deal where that he's working with the same trainer who's improving him technically is a concern to me. If the third fight does happen, I'll probably be Team Lenroy in terms of who I'll be picking. Obviously, David Allen, always someone I've supported, would love nothing more than see him win that Commonwealth belt, but I have to put that to one side and being realistic. Right now, if it was announced that the third fight was happening after the cut has healed, I'd be picking Lenroy Thomas. Let me touch briefly on Rocky Fielding, who wasn't shown on the broadcast, but I did see on the Facebook live stream. Rocky Fielding was absolutely terrible last night. He was getting walked down by a journeyman, tagged left and right with sort of slow, looping, winding, slappy hooks from this journeyman. Fielding looked uncomfortable in there. There was no jab to keep his opponent off him. He looked sluggish and undermotivated. I think he'd weighed in 5 pounds over the super middleweight limit. Appreciate that this was a late notice opponent. Appreciate it wasn't an opponent who was likely going to beat Fielding. But to me, it feels like Fielding has massively regressed. Yeah, if we look at Fielding's resume, he's actually got some decent form on there. A win over Brophy, a win over Ryder, a win over Abrase, a win over Adamu, a win over Brian Vera. You know, that sort of resume, people should be talking about Rocky Fielding. People should be, you know, thinking he's being built towards a world title. But if you look at Rocky Fielding's career, you know, he's not had the opportunities of a Jamie Cox. He's not had the opportunities even of a John Ryder, who he beat. He's not had the opportunities of a Paul Smith. He's not had the opportunities of a Martin Murray. You know, Fielding, it feels like he's won fights, won notable fights. Obviously lost the Callum Smith fight, but it feels like he hasn't really had the opportunity. You know, that some of the guys in the Matchroom stable in similar weight classes have had. And I think that's disappointing. I know he's highly ranked amongst a number of governing bodies. I know Eddie Hearn was talking about getting him a title shot and maybe putting him in with Gilberto Ramirez. Let me say, Fielding's 30 years old now. For me, that was a career low performance last night. If Fielding does not get that big title shot very, very short order, or if it doesn't look like being made right away, I'd be considering my options if I was Fielding. He simply cannot afford to go another year, be 31, going on to 32, fighting this level of fight and letting his career slip and slide away from him when, you know, people he's beaten like John Ryder and guys like Martin Murray are getting opportunities at a higher level and earning big money left, right and centre. You know, maybe a change of scene would do Rocky Fielding good. He's never been the star on the Matchroom side, and perhaps if, you know, in future he started working with someone else, he could become much more of a main player in someone else's stable, and maybe that would do him good. But yeah, for me, a very, very disappointing performance from Rocky Fielding last night, where he really laboured. Let's talk briefly, because I'm trying to keep this short, and this probably is going to go over half an hour, but not substantially over half an hour. Let's talk briefly about the Kovalev and Bivol fights. I'm going to be really honest, and sometimes honest comments like this can get me in trouble, and people will call me a casual or all sorts of names in the comment section. I didn't really enjoy these fights last night. I actually watched them this morning, but nevertheless, you get my point. Bivol, I don't actually find the most interesting guy to watch. He's got good speed, he's got good boxing pedigree, he's a very, very solid technician. He's very orthodox, you know, in the way he fights. He's not someone who, to me, shows a million different looks in the ring. And whilst he's very high class, whilst he does everything really, really well, whilst there's not the gaping weaknesses there that you see in other fighters, he kind of lacks charisma in the ring. And what I mean by that is the way he boxes, there's no bells and whistles, there's no great style, there's no great variety. It's just very, very ABC, very orthodox. He's got good speed, he's got aggression, he puts his punches together well, but there's just something missing from an excitement perspective for myself. Sullivan Barrera, credit to him for taking Bivol rounds. I thought Barrera fought quite a tactically poor fight. Barrera was getting, you know, really outboxed by Bivol, who was a lot sharper and a lot smarter than him. What I wanted to see was some sort of adjustment. You know, you can't just stand at the same range as someone who's convincingly outboxing you from the outside. I either wanted to see Barrera try and get on his bike and move a bit, or I wanted to see Barrera close and try and pressure and try and, you know, force his way onto the inside and rough Bivol up on the inside. And I didn't see any of that. You know, if you're going to fight Bivol, probably what you don't want to do is stand right at the end of his long jab cross and duke it out with him from that kind of distance. You either want to go to him and pressure him, or you want to get on your back foot and make him come to you and try and counter him. I thought Barrera's performance was somewhat lacking in ideas. I do give Bivol credit. You know, he's young in his professional career. This was only his 13th or 14th fight, something of that nature. Someone who I was speaking to online compared it to Anthony Yard and compared the level of fight Bivol was taking compared to Anthony Yard. So I do want to give Bivol credit for taking a guy on in Sullivan Barrera who's a definite top 10 in the light heavyweight division. Bivol was dominant. He showed he's a class act. I do wonder, though, in due course, will he be quite predictable? Is he someone who will be able to evolve and adapt and show different looks when he needs to? You know, he looks very, very orthodox to me, and I think that would be a big question, because there comes a time in every fighter's life where, you know, things aren't quite working out as you'd hope, and you've got to look to do something ever so slightly different. So that would be a test for Bivol when it comes to it. For me, you know, he's heavy-handed, he's fast, he's technically proficient, he's being moved quickly, he deserves a hell of a lot of respect. I'll just be honest and say that watching him fight, I don't find entertaining as a lot of the other big fighters. Sergey Kovalev versus, and I've forgotten the guy's surname, it was Igor, let's just box check it quickly, Igor Mikhalkin. Again, with Kovalev, I feel a lot of the fear factor with Kovalev is gone. And I mean both in terms of the opponents he's facing and from a fan perspective. You know, I was gripped watching Kovalev when he was fighting the likes of Nathan Cleverly, and when he went on that streak after fighting Cleverly and fought Hopkins. He was such a deadly guy, you know, the way he threw punches, the power, you know, the sort of the fear factor around him. I was actually nervous watching him fight from the sofa, you know. I feel a lot of that is gone now, and you know, Igor Mikhalkin, he was brave, he was tough, he took a bit of a beating, he took a load of shots, but he was again happy to kind of mix it with Kovalev. He ended up getting stopped on a cut in round 7, I think it was, and it was a pretty bad cut, probably the right decision, and you know, Kovalev was beating the brakes of him. But with Kovalev, I think a loss to Andre Ward was pretty detrimental to his career, the 2 losses, because sometimes you get these fighters who they've got such an aura and a mystique around them. I often said it about Chris Eubank Jr., you know, he was just viewed as this unstoppable force by his fans. I think similarly with Kovalev, he was just viewed as this like devastating knockout artist, and to see him not only lose twice to Ward, but also to see a guy like Ward being able to, you know, to live with him in those fights. For me, again, call it a casual thing to say, but it's just how I feel. It's kind of somewhat lessened the interest. Some of that mystique around Kovalev has somewhat dropped. And do I really want to spend time watching him fight games like Sabransky and Mikhalkin? For me, there's limited interest there. Obviously, the hope is that Kovalev and Bivol, who fought on the same card last night, could be matched up against each other. They both won in devastating, dominant fashion. And you know, if the 2 guys squared off at this stage, I think it would be a fascinating fight, a very, very competitive fight. Part of me wonders if Bivol may just about nick that. You know, Kovalev's 34 years old now. He's probably getting to the point where we can say he will have hit his peak, he won't be getting any better, and you know, maybe we'll start to see the signs of age in his next couple of performances. You wonder if Bivol is ever so slightly the sharper boxer, the quicker man, slightly more accomplished technician out of the 2. We'll have to see. If the fight did get made, it'd be a big step up for Bivol, and it would be against a guy who is hugely threatening and very, very hard hitting in Kovalev. So, you know, by no means a certainty, but maybe you just about lean to Bivol. But I think with these guys, they're going to need the highly competitive opponents and the big matchups to get real interest in their careers. Because, yeah, the fight kind of went under the radar a bit last night with Kell Brook on and with Wilder on, and not too many people talking about it today. And I wonder if I'm not the only one who's ever so slightly lacking in interest. Speaking of lacking in interest, I haven't yet watched the Josh Taylor fight last night. I understand he won by stoppage. The truth is that with so much boxing on last night, Josh Taylor in against a late notice replacement I hadn't heard of just didn't make it to the top of the list. I will try and check him out if I get the time. I'm a huge fan of Josh Taylor, but that's the reason I haven't covered it on the channel. It's just because I haven't had the time to view it just yet. Look, obviously the McGuigans are in the news recently relating to 1 or 2 stories about their split with Carl Frampton. All I'll say is it's good to see Josh Taylor out. It's good to see him active. It's good to see him fighting on terrestrial TV. At this point, it doesn't appear that the difficulties outside of the ring are affecting his progress. And it doesn't appear that any difficulties surrounding the McGuigans and their setup is affecting Josh Taylor's career. Let's hope it continues that way. Last night's opponent, he's had some good fights recently. Miguel Vasquez was a good opponent. O'Hara Davis was a good opponent. This guy was a guy that nobody had heard of. So, clearly it was a bit of a step down, although it wasn't an originally intended opponent. Let's see where Taylor goes. Maybe it's time to just start trying to move him to where he needs to be and force that world title action. Clearly a very, very bright prospect. There we are, guys. 35 minutes. Hopefully it hasn't been too much of a ramble. Seeing as it's 35 minutes long, if you stayed with us from start to finish, give us a hashtag in the comments section relating to Sugar Ray Leonard. Give us a Sugar Ray Leonard hashtag embedded in some sort of comment in the description box below to let me know that you've stayed with us from minute 1 to minute 35. Let me know your comments on what I've covered in this video. Please do drop them in the section below. If you're new, you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up button, which will get this video a little bit more visibility. Other than that, thank you for the support. Thank you to all of those who've tuned into the videos this weekend, who've retweeted the videos, who've shared it on Facebook, who've thumbs up the videos, who've left comments on it. It goes a long way. Hit 7,000 subscribers this weekend, which is a bit of a milestone. And yeah, all of that support has helped massively. Cheers, everyone. Have a good evening.